film. That's about it. Okay, our next film is one of my favorites for the year. It's My Dinner with Andre, and it's a film as simple as a movie can be, consisting almost entirely of an hour-and-a-half long dinner conversation between a writer and a stage director in a New York restaurant. Just conversation. But what conversation? The two men are Wally Shawn, a struggling playwright, and Andre Gregory, a successful stage director. They haven't seen each other in years when Andre calls Wally to have dinner. On a train going to the restaurant, Wally is anxious about seeing Andre again.
It was now 7 o'clock, and I would have liked nothing better than to go home and have my girlfriend Debbie cook me a nice, delicious dinner. But for the last several years, our financial circumstances have forced Debbie to work 3 nights a week as a waitress. After all, somebody had to bring in a little money. So I was on my own. But the worst thing of all was that I'd been trapped by an odd series of circumstances into agreeing to have dinner with a man I'd been avoiding literally for years. His name was Andre Gregory. At one time, he'd been a very close friend of mine, as well as my most valued colleague in the theater. In fact, he was the man who had first discovered me and put one of my plays on the professional stage. When I'd known Andre, he'd been at the height of his career as a theater director. The amazing work he did with his company, the Manhattan Project, had just stunned audiences throughout the world. But then, something had happened to Andre. He dropped out of the theater. He'd sort of disappeared. For months at a time, his family seemed only to know that he was traveling in some odd place like Tibet, which was really weird because he loved his wife and children. He never used to like to leave home at all. Or else you'd hear that someone had met him at a party and he'd been telling people that he talked with trees or something like that. Obviously, something terrible had happened to Andre. The whole idea of meeting him made me very nervous. I mean, I really wasn't up for that sort of thing. I had problems of my own. I mean, I couldn't help Andre. Was I supposed to be a doctor or what?
Now, isn't that an amazing scene? He's just talking about his feelings going off to dinner, and he's standing in a car, a subway car, and yet we're fascinated by that.
I'd like to see the movie again.
Well,
right
you want to meet this guy, and we do. When these two guys finally sit down to dinner, the film takes off into intellectual outer space, with Andre telling Wally all about the various cult experiences he had. Here's a sample.
So, I was spending the summer on Long Island with my family, and I heard about this community in Scotland called Findhorn, where people sang and talked and meditated with plants. And it was founded by several rather middle-class English and Scottish eccentrics. Some of them intellectuals and some of them not. And I'd heard that they'd grown things in soil that supposedly nothing can grow in because it's almost beach soil. And they'd they'd grown the largest cauliflowers in the world, and they're sort of cabbages, and they've grown trees that can't grow in the British Isles. So I went there. I mean, it is an amazing place, Wally. I mean, if there are insects bothering the plants, they will talk with the insects. And, you know, make an agreement by which they'll set aside a special patch of vegetables just for the insects, and then the insects will leave the main part alone. Things like that. And everything they do beautifully. I mean, the buildings just shine. I mean, for instance, the icebox, the stove, the car, you know, they all have names. And since you wouldn't treat Helen, the icebox, with any less respect than you would Margaret, your wife, you know, you make sure that Helen is as clean as Margaret, or treated with equal respect.
At first he's silly, and then he's magical and quite wonderful, and you just don't know how to react except you're entranced. Andre goes on and on like that, with Wally listening throughout most of the film until just after finishing about his main course, Wally apparently says, at least to himself, enough, and he begins disagreeing with Andre's questioning attitude toward life. Wally believes in more simple verities of literature and comfort and friends, and the film really turns into an exciting and humorous debate between their two lifestyles. It's very much like one of those all-night conversations so many of us have had with friends and family, whether it be in a college dormitory, over the kitchen table, or at the neighborhood saloon. Why do I like this film so much? And I really do. because it gives us characters as fascinating as some of the most interesting people I've ever known. These are not cornball attempts at approximating human emotions as in, say, rollover. No, My Dinner with Andre is reality crystallized in one long night of fascinating discussion. These guys are great. I wish I could have been at the table.
I was watching this scene. I didn't want it to end. I didn't want to come back to the show and have to talk about the movie.
Now, what are the
much.
qualities? Because I think this shows us at least where we critics stand for something, because this is what I want films to be like.
Well, I've never seen another film like this, and I don't know if there could be another film like this, but I'm glad this film is like it is. And one thing, people hear that it's a long conversation, and they think, oh, I'm going to have to sit in the theater and listen to these two guys talk for hours. The fact is, it doesn't seem long. It goes by just like this because Andre Gregory is such a spellbinding conversationalist that when he's talking about those giant cabbages or the women dancing around the trees under the full moon in Poland or that strange monk in Tibet that he goes to visit, the guy who can stand on his fingernails, we see those images in our head. The movie is like listening to a radio play in that although you see two people on the screen, in your mind you're also seeing these strange and weird and wonderful scenes and experiences. It's spellbinding. It's a wonderful movie.
And this, to me, knocks all of the notions about what movies have to be into a cocked hat. Because here we are with Hollywood cinema spending tens of millions of dollars to faithfully recreate towns and villages and everything else. And here, with people talking at a dinner table, it's just as fascinating, more so.
You're absolutely right. It's really going to be one of my, way up on my list of the best films of 1981.